does insight-driven messaging look like for sales? Like a whole lot more deals, fast. Jump on high-intent leads in the moment with Intercom, the business messenger that extends the reach of your team 24/7. Intercom creates more opportunities for you by booking meetings and collecting data from leads automatically. Take Intercom user Elegant Themes. They now convert 25% of leads through Intercom's messenger. Deals don't wait. Get them with Intercom. Go to intercom.com/deals. That's intercom.com/deals.
Hey, it's time to jump on board the sales pipeline, see if we can't ride it all the way to shore with the man waving the flag and guiding us in. It's Matt Hines. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Paul. How we doing?
I'm doing good. We've missed you. You've been traveling the world. Every time I turn on TV, there you are with some famous personality. You got your arm around him. You're with Elon Musk. You're with Richard Branson. You're all over the place.
There must be some other Matt.
Well, it wasn't you? Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't me. No, we've had a couple reruns. We've had a couple recorded shows. It's summertime, Paul, and had to spend a little time on the beach. I wasn't that far away from you, actually.
Really?
I was down with the family. So my wife is from north of San Diego, and we live in Seattle, which is different weather than you have down there. You have beach drizzle. We have 9 months of the year more than drizzle. So my deal with my wife is that we will, we live up here. My business is up here. We're raising kids up here. We both enjoy it up here. But every summer we go down for 10 plus days and rent a house in North County, San Diego, kind of around Encinitas. And just basically have a schedule of, lazy mornings, beach time, tacos, naps, repeat.
You're talking about my daily life.
This is, it's a hard job, but someone's got to live it, right?
That's right. Exactly here.
Probably not that far away from our guest today, who's in New York, where I'm sure it's not hot. It's not humid. It's New York in August, which I'm sure is just pleasant as all get out.
Always. Not the New York I visited in August, but maybe this year.
Oh my Lord! Well, I'm East Coast bound myself next week. I'll be going a little north. I'll be in Toronto next week, so hopefully not quite as bad. But anyway, thanks everyone for joining us on another live episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. Very excited to have our new sponsor Intercom with us. You'll hear more about them a little later, and they'll be with us for much of the rest of 2019. So thanks very much, Intercom, for joining us as a proud partner and sponsor here on Sales Pipeline Radio. If you're joining us live on the Funnel Media Radio Network, thanks so much for making us part of your work day. If you're joining us on the podcast, thanks so much for making time for us. This is a busy time of year for me, podcast-wise, Paul. We were coming up on the college football season. A couple of my favorite college football podcasts are doing their conference previews. It takes a lot of time. So if you're fitting us into that with everything else that's out there, thanks so much. We're well over 100,000 listeners now and continue to grow at an accelerated pace. So thanks for that. And every episode of Sales Pipeline Radio, past, present, and future, always available up at salespipelineradio.com. We're featuring some of the best and brightest minds in sales and marketing, B2B sales and marketing every week. Today is absolutely no different. Very excited to have with us today Dan Englander. He is the founder of Sales Schema, and he is also the host of the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
When your team and my assistant, they asked us, how did we want to title this episode? What I chose was The Death and Bright Future of Marketing Agencies. Because I think, you have an interesting story. You started as, what you self-describe as an agency accounts grunt in New York. And so for anyone who has worked at an agency earlier in their career, I was at a PR agency. We all know what that means. Sort of seen the downfall of the traditional agency model, and your business now helps, boutique specialist agencies win those bigger clients. When I say the death and bright future of marketing agencies, it doesn't necessarily mean the same agencies are coming out the other side, right? Talk a little bit about what that means and what you've seen in the market.
Well, and I'm speaking in broad strokes here. So there's always exceptions. There's always going to be agencies that are still doing what they've done for 30 years and that are kind of making it work. But I think that there's a lot of, volatility and disruption like there is with every other industry and walk of life with a little thing called the internet. So, what we've seen, and this is obviously goes well beyond my time and yours, is somewhat kind of a realm of consolidation, where there were a few players, there were, big agencies of record like Mad Men and that sort of thing. There's a lot less consolidation. There's a lot more disruption in the form of smaller shops springing up all the time, and a lot wider use of skill sets that brands can draw from. So it's like every other walk of life where it's erring towards the long tail and erring towards specialization. And the highest leverage point for brands, and this applies to our company too in the way that we're helping agencies, working with small groups of specialists over kind of shorter, faster-moving time horizons, as opposed to getting stuck with an AOR or trying to build something in-house they don't know how to build and becomes really expensive and risky and is frankly, outside of their core competencies. That's kind of like the by and large trend that we're seeing, and that the better agencies are sort of, getting on top of these days.
We continue, though, to see in the market, I'm assuming you may see it as well, especially maybe bigger organizations that are used to hiring, large agencies that can do all of the things, right? And, we're looking, still have people talking about having an agency of record. And it certainly seems like the decentralization and the sort of rapid, explosion of so many different diverse sets of media and sets of communication channels makes it really, really hard for one agency to own everything. It's not like it's magazine, it's newspaper, it's TV, it's radio, and that's it. Now, what was 3 or 4 options is now so many different options across digital and non-digital. I mean, is it possible to have a full service? I mean, as nice as it would be to have one agency, one throat to choke, is it feasible for any organizations to still have that? Even those large businesses, or maybe CPG brands that require that big thinking? Like, how should companies think about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there's obviously not like a one size fits all. This is something that we're all kind of trying to figure out now. So I'm not going to have the perfect answer. But the way that I see the AOR as being effective still is when it's on a niche basis. Like, we've had clients that are agencies of record just for B2B industrial, and they literally take over all the needs of a factory. And that I think works really well because the factory, it's like so far outside of their core competency to be dealing with marketing on almost any level. And they can, once they really, really understand the business, then they can do really well, and it kind of makes a lot of sense for them to handle everything. But I tend to be skeptical, in this day and age about the utility of a giant agency of record serving all the needs for, Coca-Cola or something like that, because there's just, things are moving so fast, and I think that, opportunity cost tends to be a lot higher stuck with one agency for too long. Understanding of the technology, I think we've talked about this before, perhaps a little bit, but navigating something like 50,000 pieces of technology, 50,000 ad tech companies is really hard too. So to have like one group of people that is probably offloading a lot of that work to smaller shops anyway, and that's not a secret to anyone, becoming more, less effective, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. We're talking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Dan Englander. He is the founder of Sales Schema. And talk a little bit about what you see with marketing service companies in terms of their ability to sort of find and win big deals. What do you see in terms of their sophistication around sales pipeline strategy? And what are some of the biggest efficiencies that you tend to have to go and focus on to help them build more pipeline?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by and large, most of the agencies that we work with and that we see out in the market have built themselves up on referrals and personal networks, and they get to a spot where that's not working anymore, and they're well aware that it's not working. And then they kind of get into this mode of trying to do sales as a hobby and trying to do sales in their spare time, and then they get caught off course with, different tactics and shiny objects when really they haven't really built the human capital out, the actual people to go out there and hunt and do all the things that are sophisticated that you're talking about on your show every week. So where they're starting from is kind of at a place of trying to get relationships and trying to get new business more consistently outside of their personal networks. And that's something that we're helping them out with a lot, because what we find is like a lot of the times they'll be trying to build a sales team in-house, but it's based on knowledge they don't have yet. And it's also a very expensive and risky proposition, because your listeners and you, I'm sure, are familiar with predictable revenue and, the ideal, platonic ideal of the sales team and all of these things that are really required to make it all work. And there's different variations on them. There's not like a perfect model for it, but it essentially takes a fulfillment process in the team. Our whole value prop is kind of being that in a more ready-to-go way that's, again, practicing what we preach, specialized on a niche or on marketing service companies, basically, if that answers the question.
It does, yeah. And I think when I first got started about 11 years ago, had a friend of mine that was running an agency, and I asked him, this is around 2008, and his response to Sales Pipeline was, well, phone used to ring, and now it doesn't ring as much anymore. So in that time, there's been a lot of flossiness around the idea of inbound. Like, if I get enough traffic, like that's just going to solve my lead problem. Well, inbound doesn't really solve for quantity or quality. There's no predictability around it. And even if you get an inbound lead, I mean, I think for those that have gone through this process, a qualified lead doesn't close itself. So talk a little bit about sort of the idea of building deal flow, but also creating a more disciplined approach to managing and converting the opportunities that are in front of you.
Yeah, it's a good question. And a lot of it is sort of like an initial mindset change. From I'm talking to people, I want to talk to people when they're solution aware, to I want to talk to people when they are problem aware and before they get to that solution aware stage. Because at that point, with the amount of competition and the flood of marketing services, by the time somebody's solution aware, unless you're just really lucky, it's unlikely you're going to be in touch with them on a level that's quantifiable enough to sustain your agency. So the first thing is kind of getting somebody for us to be partnered with in the agency that is excited and motivated to be talking to people at an earlier stage. That's kind of the first step. And then from there, I think we're seeing a lot of situations where people are still tied to that, kind of stuck in this reactive mode of, we're going to have a good conversation and then hit us up later when you have a need. And that's, that very rarely works, because guess what's going to happen? That great conversations you had with the CMO 6 months ago, they're going to forget all about it. They're going to get busy. You're going to get busy. And then they're going to re-bubble this thing to the top 6 months later. And then whoever happens to be in front of them in their inbox, and their search results or whatever it might be, is going to be the one that wins the business. And that could be you if you're lucky, but it probably won't be. So a lot of what we're doing is kind of recommending ways for our clients to get people in the door sooner. I mean, for us in our business, it happens to be a paid strategy, an audit, kind of going through their situation, suggesting something helpful, regardless of whether or not they implement it. And, our better clients, whether they're selling big web projects or they're selling, consistent marketing services, have usually something to that effect that's kind of specific to their industry. And, this is back to specialization again. That process of figuring out what that thing is becomes a lot easier when you have constraints, when you don't have a million markets you're serving, when you might have like 2 or 3 and eventually maybe just 1. So that's kind of the first thing from there. And then I could go a lot further into tactical stuff and in terms of what we're doing and what we're building out, but I'll leave it to you.
No, I think it's super helpful to hear, and I think that you mentioned sometimes people's urgency to buy or people's timeline to buy isn't necessarily ours, and we see that across many different industries and different size and types of companies. And at the same time, while it may feel kind of like simple and random that the buyer just follows up with whoever was right in front of them most recently, it's also the solution to sort of getting some of those deals back is almost just as simple. Just continue to follow up, right? I mean, just don't go dark and hope that they're going to remember and hope they're going to be there for you when they are ready. Well, we got to take a quick break. We're going to have to pay some more bills. We'll be right back on Sales Pipeline Radio. We got more with Dan Englander. He is the founder of Sales Schema. We're going to be talking about multi-channel marketing, talk a little bit about his podcast. Might even get into a little Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Paul. Maybe we'll see. We'll be right back on Sales Pipeline Radio.
Sales teams, is your website helping you turn prospects into customers? Because Intercom thinks it should be. Intercom makes that little chat bubble in the corner of a website. That's their messenger, but it's so much more than that. The Intercom messenger is designed for businesses to jumpstart on customer intent in the moment. It connects you when you're there or automatically books meetings and captures data leads when you're away. You'll sell more efficiently. Like Intercom user Elegant Themes. They added the Intercom Messenger to their site, and now they convert 25% of their leads to paid subscriptions through live chat. Just having the Messenger sparked valuable customer conversations that Elegant Themes might not have had otherwise. That's Intercom's whole deal, connecting you to customers while they're on your website with timely, personal insights. Because when customers have a great experience, it's great for business too. Help your website help you land more customers. Then see everything Intercom can do. Go to intercom.com/deals today. That's intercom.com/deals.
And we're going to flip it back to Matt, see if he can work in all that he promised.
Well, we're going to try, and I was going to make it harder by asking you a question. So,
okay.
For those of you who know, this is an audio podcast. We don't do the video. This is not the Mike and Mike show on ESPN.
Right.
And as we're recording this, I always have a video up of Paul in his studio down in Beach Drizzle, California.
That's right.
So I can see him give me signals on when we need to sort of wrap things up and when you go to commercial. And I can't help but notice behind you, Paul, is that a how to play the ukulele? Is that a ukulele songbook behind you?
That is behind me here. I'm trying to teach myself. I figured when I'm sitting at the beach, I got to do something here. So I'm trying to learn the ukulele.
phenomenal. I thought it's so cool. One of these days, I mean, I love our bumper music. It's that cool guitar riff. One day I want you to do a cover with the ukulele, and that could be a very cool transition of what we do.
I like it.
Speaking of transition, we were going to talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but maybe instead we should talk about, did you know that our guest today, Dan Englander, the founder of Sales Schema, he was also previously the hip-hop director at KZSC radio station in Santa Cruz. He was the host, wait for it, of the Danger Zone radio show.
Ooh.
Dan, can you please talk a little bit about...
And he's got to talk about the banana slugs up there, too.
Well, that may be too. That's true. He did get his bachelor's degree in history at UCSD. So go banana slugs, go. But I really want to hear more about Danger Zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like this is your life episode. I feel like if somebody shook me and said, "Hey, Santa Cruz didn't happen. It was all just a weird dream, the trip that you had," I'd have to second guess myself, because it was basically a show that first started at 3 to 6 a.m. and then I gradually got promoted to the 10:30 to 12:30 a.m. slot. And, if you've ever been to Santa Cruz, they have one of kind of the more classic, like, hippie college radio stations that's been around, and it's this little cabin, out in the redwoods, basically. So, we would have guests on and everything, and people would, like, rap into the mic. And that was kind of my start with what would become the podcast I have now, which I think is probably less exciting than having on a bunch of Oakland rappers all the time on the Danger Zone, but it's, helps pay the bills and so on.
Well, talk a little bit about what it takes to sort of create engaging content today, right? Because, this is Sales Pipeline Radio. We talk about sales pipeline stuff. We talk about B2B. I make fun of beach drizzle at the beginning of calls sometimes, so Paul and I will talk about University of Minnesota football and University of Michigan football. Sorry, got it wrong. See, that's like if you tell me I went to Washington State University, that'd be very bad. Sorry about that. Like, one of my favorite podcasts in college football is called The Solid Verbal, and partly it's interesting because those guys are funny. They're engaging. Like, they talk about pop culture. Like, they do Q&A episodes during the off season, and half the episodes and half the Qs have nothing to do with football. So talk a little bit about, like, how do you have, like, a business focused podcast? I mean, you've done a lot of print stuff. You've got podcasts. You've done a lot of different media. How do you keep it focused but also keep it interesting?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's a really good point. And some of my favorite sports stuff, like Grantland and now the Ringer, covers all sorts of different things, and it really doesn't really clash. Like, it kind of weirdly all blends together and has a certain, like, tone and brand to it. I think for us, it's been about me kind of getting to lord over my own domain and have the people on that I think are going to be fun to talk to about things beyond just business. And then, that sounds selfish and all, but I think it creates a more entertaining episode for everyone. So in the past, it's been my friends who have agencies and us having an episode where we're just drinking wine or whatever. And the thing that I'm always negotiating with myself is are we going too far into just the stuff we're into? Like, with jiu-jitsu, all my friends and I try to choke each other 3 times a week. And I always wondered, are these interesting metaphors for people, or are these just kind of getting in the way of things? But I think you have to have fun with it. The thing I like about podcasts is it's just a much better way, at least for me personally, to do that for my business, because I get to do 3 birds with 1 stone. I get to talk to interesting people. I get to create content, and I basically get to do it in a way that isn't amazingly time-consuming compared to writing like a 1,000-word blog post or something like that. So that's kind of how I've approached it.
Well, if you do it right, I think you basically do write close to a 10,000-word blog post just with the podcast itself. If you take an edited version of this, you put it up on your site as Q&A. Should be quite a few decent keywords in there that the search engines like. In addition to the fact, I guess I should say, that a lot more people are listening to podcasts. And the more and more I listen to the successful podcasts, they're not people that have engineered a particular format. They're like, I did something I would listen to. I did something that was fun. I did something I would enjoy, right? And so I think that to follow that, and I think for those that, maybe saying, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, but I don't really have an angle or strategy yet. Just get on talk. Just be yourself. If you're going to be successful, it's going to be based on not just your insights, but your personality, your ability to open up and be casual and just have some fun with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I find it to be a much easier way to handle things. To back up a bit, like, I'm going to be having these conversations anyway if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing for our clients and for my business. I'm going to want to learn what's going on in different areas and so on. And, obviously some conversations are better to have in private when it comes to that. But a lot of this stuff, there's no reason that it can't be helping others at the same time. So that's kind of how I feel about it. This is just a force multiplier.
All right. So with my marketing hat on, I can say like this all makes sense. This is a great way to do a podcast, great way to drive engagement. That's all fine and good. As the host of Sales Pipeline Radio and as the founder of Sales Schema, how do I take all this stuff? How do companies justify all of what we're talking about here and say, well, how does this generate pipeline for me? How do you cross the chasm from all of this great engaging content and say, okay, but like my job is not to drive. I mean, we've got a lot of listeners. That's great. But how do I convert that into something I can buy a beer with?
Yeah, so, I mean, if we're getting into the tactical forest, which we can do with the caveat that it's not going to be, a one-size blueprint for everybody, but I can talk about what's worked for us. And it's essentially been, selling ourselves, giving away stuff that's useful on the podcast and kind of getting people into the loop like that. And then from there, we really like to mix it up. So it's not just like we're just interviewing people that we might want to sell to one day, but we're interviewing other people that our clients need to be partnered with and listening to. But I think that if you're just thinking about a podcast as just a way to close deals directly, it's kind of not the right way to do it anyway. I think it's more of a broad frame sort of thing where it might not be the role of the new business person that just has a sales quota to be the one running the podcast. I think it's more of a CEO or marketing person or a broader role. Because there's a lot of partners, there's people that we can work with, there's other, like we're doing now, like there's other inroads, there's potential hires you might make in the future. All of these things can come from the sort of relationships you're developing by having a barrel of ink, in the form of a podcast. That's kind of how I think about it.
Just a few more minutes here on Sales Pipeline Radio, wrapping up with Dan Englander. He's the founder of Sales Schema. We will put links to his company website and his content channels as well in the notes for this podcast. Dan, I mean, you've run a successful career really from the bottom up, right? Starting at the ground up as an account coordinator, moving into more senior roles, and now in your role as founder of your own company. Who are some of the people that you've learned from along the way? They could be authors, professors, managers, people that you might recommend other people check out and learn from as well.
Yeah, where to begin? I'm just looking at my bookshelf right now, as you know. And I think that, Neil Rackham, his stuff has been big, and at least as we're talking about sales. And I think Challenger Sale is sort of the spiritual successor to that in a lot of ways. So that's been helpful in terms of real tactical sales stuff. It sounds cliche, but it kind of is what started it all. So I tip my hat to Ferris, that started for me being in a job and then jetting off to my girlfriend at the time, and eventually starting a consultancy and everything. So it all started with that damn book, for better or worse. And then there's a lot that you learn after reading it. It's not that simple, and things have changed. But I got to tip my hat to him. In terms of like bigger, more intellectual ideas, Nassim Taled's been really influential in terms of how to think about risk and how to think about these sort of bigger forces that move the world around. So those are a few things that come to mind. And then in my personal life, the first guy, Will Gadea, who runs Idea Rocket, which is a successful animation studio, and I was selling for him originally, and he's not a sales guy, but he was like, hey man, you're in a sales role, do you want to figure this out? So he, invested in training for us and helped me kind of get the initial experience that led to everything else. So I got to tip my hat to him.
Love it. Yeah, and I love your mention of Tim Ferriss. We don't hear that one as often. And I remember the first time I read the 4-Hour Work Week, and my initial results is like, well, that's all just bullshit, right? And so I think if you try to follow that directly, sorry, Paul, might have to edit that out. But I think, there's components of that certainly make sense. I came back from my little San Diego vacation a week and a half ago. I have not put my work email back on my phone since then, and I think I might keep it off. I look at it less. I'm less distracted by it. There's nothing I'm missing. I'm still looking at my email when I need to, but I'm also far more in the moment, present on the things that I need to be doing when I'm not in my email, either whether it's at work or whether it's at home. So all those things are super important. We want to thank our guest today again, Dan Englander, the founder of Sales Schema. We will link to his site and his content channels in our show notes. If you like this conversation, want to listen to it again, or share it with others in your organization, some of your peers and colleagues, you'll find it a couple days up on Sales Pipeline Radio. We will also have a transcript of this conversation up on HeinzMarketing.com in about a week as well. Join us next week and every week at 11:30 Pacific. We're featuring some of the best and brightest minds in sales and marketing. I know, I almost made it. I was distracted by the ukulele again, Paul. I apologize. But hey, thanks for joining us again. From my great producer, Paul, this is Matt Heinz. We'll see you next week on Sales Pipeline Radio.
We're making it in. We're swimming into shore here on the Sales Pipeline Radio Show. Brought to you by Matt Heinz and Heinz Marketing.